There'll be some tears shed here this morning, but that's okay. That's very okay. Nobody's being dramatic or anything like that. The emotions are raw and they're human. So I don't even know almost where to start with this, except we'll start in the timeline.
Sure.
When you heard what was going on, when you found out, you were sleeping, I'm sure.
So as always happens when something major is about to happen, I had left my work phone in my car overnight on accident. And so I got a phone call around 6:30 a.m. That was like, do you know about what's happening in Brandon? We've got an officer shot. And I said, where is it? And they said, Crossgates. And I just decided I'm going to Crossgates, like I don't know where it is yet, but I'm going.
Of course you are.
So I got up out of the bed and put on the shirt that I'd had on the day before because it was sitting right there. And, just thinking I was going to go out there, dude was going to be fine. They were going to have shut everything down almost by the time I got there, because sometimes that's how it works. So anyway, when I got there, obviously it was still going on, but the suspect had been very quiet for a long time. And so, it's like we sat there and, they brought in different tools and resources and other agencies. Clinton brought their bomb dog, well, not bomb dog, that's an actual dog, but their bomb robot, or as some people call it, the robot dog.
Yes.
But so all those things were coming through. And so as the media, we're just standing out here watching all this and almost kind of speculating and, of course, getting texts and all of that. And so the word that we were hearing was he's probably dead in there.
Suspect,
it's like we don't know if he committed suicide. I mean, they don't know what he's doing. Not in a derogatory way, but just like he's just quiet. And then it was like, and this is going to be kind of engraved in my brain for a long time. And I should add here, I counted a while back, and I've tried to keep count as we've went since, but I think this is my 52nd line of duty death that I've covered as a reporter.
In Mississippi?
In Mississippi, yeah. And
really?
Yeah. And even to the point that, like, when in 2017, when William Durr was killed in Brookhaven in that spree that killed 8 people, I remember one of the officers looking at me and saying, what happens next? You know better than we do. And I thought, what? And then I started to count, and then I started to think about it, and I was like, when something happens in your agency or a neighboring agency, you're very much a part of that. But for me, when it happens, I have to get into the trenches with it, no matter where it is in the state. And sometimes I do go to the scene, sometimes I don't. But anyway, the point is, this is going on, and this will be engraved in my brain just because of the way it happened. So we knew we had a guy shot, and we knew that it was going back and forth. We heard he was in bad condition, then we heard it wasn't as bad as we thought, and then we heard it's bad again. And but you think that it's over. You think all of this that you're watching is just still part of the routine. And I was on my Facebook Live. I'd been on, at that point, I think it was around 6 minutes and 15 seconds, something like that. And I'm just going through, like, so the agencies that are here, there's Capitol Police, there's whatever. And all of a sudden, I hear something that sounds like a gunshot. And I stopped and I was like, in my mind, what I'm thinking is, dude is supposed to be dead. So that's a flashbang. They threw that in just in case he wasn't. In my head, that's what I'm telling myself. So you can see on the video, I'm like, that sounded like maybe a flashbang. It could be gunshots. I think it's a flashbang. And then all of a sudden, the officers on the scene, which you couldn't see as well. I was using my iPhone, so you couldn't see it as well on my video as you could on some of the TV stations. But all of a sudden, there's all this animation, and people kind of start to run and start to, just like I said, become animated. And then all of a sudden, they're waving us out of the line of fire. And they're one of the officers, and you can see it on my video. He says, "Clear the streets, get out of the street." And as a veteran in this world that is first responders and police, I knew what that was. We got to get an ambulance in here. So I look over, and all the TV reporters are moving towards the back of this house that we were kind of in their front yard. And I said something like, looks like they've got a shot from over here, because they had all put their cameras there. And so I went to see what they could see. And as I'm walking over there, I get a text that, and we didn't, obviously, that's why I always say those situations are fluid. You never know if the information you get is exact. And it said a Pearl officer has been killed. And in that moment, I said an expletive live on camera, and then I was like, I'm so sorry I just cussed y'all. I hope what I just was told wasn't true. So I go on for a minute or two, and I'm fine. And I'm like, well, this isn't a good shot over here, da-da-da. And then I keep saying it while I'm live. You know how your text...
Yeah, this is live, so the whole thing. You know, and these are things happening in your head in split second, split second, split second.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And at one point, I just shifted everything I was saying to like, guys, what's happening here is very serious. Because how do you navigate that on the air?
That's it. That's why we got you here.
Yeah.
You have to how do you?
Right.
You do it though, don't you?
Well, you do, and that's the thing. There have been times that things have been very serious before, but this is the first time I have been there as an officer died. Mm-hmm. And as a first responder, I've been there when people died. You know, I've actually held people while they died. Or while someone they love died. But that was the thing that was going through my head is as we stood here thinking everything was fine, it's not fine. And of course, there's also with all those agencies there, you know, they said Pearl. So you're going through your head, all the Pearl officers that you know, and like, oh my gosh, the kids that they have at home and that kind of thing. And then we start hearing that it's not Pearl, it's Madison SO. No, it's Madison PD. No, it's Madison SO. And so you have these things going on. And in the meantime, usually I would just talk through it. When you're Facebook Live, you just keep talking, you know, you tell the story over and over again because people are coming in and out, that kind of thing. And I couldn't even do that. Oh. It was just like, all right, so you see this officer here has her tactical weapon. There's a lot of yelling. And that's really the best I could do at that point because what was going on in my head is I have to keep it together. Although I didn't so much. I mean, I cried. You could hear me crying in the background.
Well, you held yourself really well.
Thank you.
I mean, really well.
Yeah.
I don't think I could have.
Ooh. Well, I think by this point in my career, too, everybody knows I cry on Facebook. So it
Nothing
turns
wrong
out
with
okay.
that.
But yeah.
Yes.
But I think, too, it was like I knew all the guys that were, not all, but I knew a lot of the guys that were up there. And we're talking about big, tough, you know, longtime SWAT members. You know, we're not talking about rookie officers. And the thing was, we already knew that the Brandon officer was a retired highway patrolman. And by the way, do you have an update on him? Because I think he's going to be okay. Yeah. I know he went through surgery and is doing better than he could be at this time. So that ended up being, the back and forth of that ended up being that, you know, he is going to be fine.
And for privacy reasons, people are saying, well, who is it? Mm-hmm. For privacy reasons, the family wants to keep it quiet, and I think so does the PD.
Yeah.
We just know that he was taken to UMMC. That's all we know.
Right.
And usually, you know, members of the media, well, we want to know. Well, you know what? You can't know this time, okay? You just can't know.
Right.
This is a terrible situation, and there are things that we all can't know right now. You will know in time, but not right now.
And that is a fine line, as you know, Mary, to tread because, you know, I had people on Facebook when I saw the stretcher come out.
With the first one, with the Brandon officer,
or this is right
Randy
after
Tyler.
Yeah,
Officer
right after Tyler was shot. I see all this motion going across the street. There was another road that was right there. See the motion going across the street, and all the I'm looking for an ambulance is what I'm doing, you know. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden there's this motion, and here comes a stretcher across here. And I mean, nobody was on it yet, but it was clear what they were doing. And at that point, it was like I just turned the camera away and I said, I can't show you what we're about to see over here, you know, that kind of thing. And people were saying, why are you turning the camera away? And the thing is, what I want us to remember in the media as well as the viewers is that to you, if you're watching or if you're not familiar with these situations, this is playing out like a movie. This is something to gawk at. This is something that we're all going to talk about over lunch for a couple days because we saw it on such and such. But the problem is, yeah, you saw it on such and such, but years ago I wrote a blog about how journalists, if you're doing it right, we're the filters. We make things palpable for you. So you can gawk and you can say what you need to and say like, ooh, acted like you know somebody who knew something, so you know more than everybody else. And that's what goes on out there. But when you are on that scene and that life is lost or you are aware of how that, there are so many details of so many of these cop killings that I never released because the world isn't ready for what people will do when they get the chance to kill a cop. and including on June 9th, we had the anniversary of Meridian Officer Kenneth Croom's killing from last year. He was a friend of mine. And I think for me, especially when I heard some of the details of that, y'all are out here thinking it's a clean shot to the head or, whatever like that. This world that we live in does not like protectors.
Well, it damn well better start liking them. I mean, I don't know what else to say. What do they think? What do they think? How stupid can somebody be?
Right.
And thank God, I don't think we have a lot of stupid people like that here in
Mississippi is better.
I think we are. I think we are better than that. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but, as far as not knowing details, I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Because if they are so horrible, and this is a protector,
right?
Let them have an element of privacy. And I'm always very fond of talking about the veil of secrecy, falling down in Mississippi over certain things,
right?
Certain things that happen at our schools, for instance, that are not egregious, but that we need to know about. That veil of secrecy comes down all the time. But this one. This is a different thing.
Well, and it's interesting too because you do tread such a line because law enforcement and that community they're used to holding back details, and the public wants the details. And so yesterday, one thing that I saw was when Brandon had their press conference, they gave some of the details from the scene. So of course the media reports it. And that said, I didn't think the details were anything specifically. I mean, they're tragic and terrible, but I didn't feel like there was any reason that you couldn't tell those details. But I had a former law enforcement officer on my Facebook page that called me tacky for the way I reported it. And at that point, I was like, you know what, guy, this has been a rough day for everybody. Brandon put it out. We reported it. And at this point, if you want to call me tacky and you're familiar with my work, please start following one of the, mainstream outlets instead. Because, I gave it everything yesterday.
Did you
and
ever?
So
Yes.
did those guys, so.
And even also, I have to say even more so today because the world might be ready to move on, but they're not. And you're not either.
No.
You are all in a huge state of shock.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I think the thing is, again, the world will say things, and it always blows my mind when they say, well, they knew what they signed up for. And let me tell you something, even if I'm not a police officer, and I know I'm not, but the point is, I did not know what I was signing up for when I decided to be a reporter. And when I decided I was good at crime reporting and that I wanted to do that for a long time, which most people do that for the first 2 years of their career and then they stop. But I wanted this to be what I was good at. I did not know what I was. Thank you.
Oh, you're great at it. I mean, obviously, I call you our premier crime reporter because you are.
Thank you. But
because you're there.
Right.
You go there, and it's yeah. And that guy Godbold, from Brookhaven, right? The Brookhaven shooting. He confessed to you.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw that happen. He confessed to you.
Now, I have to tell you a quick story, and I know that this is a more somber show, but this is kind of funny, and it's about Bert. So,
he would have been there yesterday.
Yeah, he
absolutely.
would have been. But when Bert, several years back, like when Randy Tucker had just taken office, a guy escaped.
Day one.
A guy escaped a standoff and came out to confess to Bert Case. And I remember I was sitting at my desk at the Clarion Ledger, and I was like, I am really jealous of that. I was like, I am so jealous of that. Like, how does Bert Case, oh my, how am I going to,
how do I, but you got Godbold.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Then when it happened years later, and I was like, man, I remember wishing that I could be Bert Case. And on the one hand, I was very, I can never say that I'm proud of that moment though, because of the carnage that came first.
Right. But that he came to you. Well, I was going to tell you more about that, the Bert and the confession day. Bert had been off for a couple of months. He'd had knee surgery. He did not have a knee replacement, folks. He had a knee that had gotten full of staph infection, and he had to have it cleaned out, and he even had to have PT. He even had to learn to walk again, for heaven's sakes. And so after 2 months, he came back to work, and he had a sign to go out to Madison County, where a guy had holed up in his house all whole weekend long.
Right.
And around the corner from the house comes this guy. He's got his driver's license in one hand, and his other hand is up in the air, and he comes to Bert with this. And Bert goes, well, you need to go talk to a deputy or whatever.
Right.
But meanwhile, that was Randy Tucker. I hope you're listening, Sheriff.
Yeah.
This was Randy Tucker's first day on the job as the sheriff.
Right.
And he said, I'm thinking, what is this? Is this what I'm in for? Is this what it's going to be like to be the sheriff of Madison County? And on that note, we're going to stop here and do a break, and we'll be back on the other side. We've got Therese Apel here, dedicating the show to all our law enforcers, all sorts, police, fire, sheriffs, deputies, FBI, everybody. This day, you got your blue.
Yes, I have my blue on.
You get your blue on. I've got a black top and blue pants in honor, because the show is dedicated to all law enforcement today.
Yes.
And it really should be every day, because of what you all do, all of our yesterdays, what you will do today, and what you will do all of our tomorrows. We can't say thanks enough, I mean, that's just all there is to it. And if you can't say thanks to these people, I think there's something wrong with you. I mean, really. I mean, that's the way I feel about that. And Therese Apel is here. She is the founder, the CEO, and the reporter for Dark Horse Press, the civilian who knows more than anybody about how law enforcement works. And she's our premier crime reporter, and there all day Monday in Brandon. I want to talk about Randy Tyler.
Yes.
Let's talk about him. Randy Tyler, among other things that he did, he was with the Ridgeland PD for a number of years, served his last year as chief, 2013 to 14, or I think it was, or 14 to 15. It was a year anyway.
Yeah,
and he went to work at Madison PD. It was one of the things he did was a trainer.
Yes.
And what he did yesterday is what he trains people to do, his recruits, and he showed how it's done. And he ran toward it, and he lost his life.
I think one of the things when I look at somebody like him and like an incident like yesterday, and I don't always know how to say this right, but both he and the Brandon officer that were shot were veterans, have given their life to this, and were well known in law enforcement circles. These are talented veteran officers, and you got a brat with a gun who's having some kind of crisis. And I know there are people that would say, be careful because you're talking about mental health. I know. But you've got a 22-year-old kid who ends up taking out, a life that has given and given and given and given. And what gave him the right? And I think that that is always one of the hardest things for me to stomach. It's kind of like when I was talking to somebody last night, and it's kind of like when you have a story of a person that fought overseas and then they come back and they get knifed in a bar fight or something like, you just feel like this is not how this story is supposed to end. Right. And with Randy Tyler, it's like I can't say who it was, but another well-known veteran officer was leaving the scene before I knew who was shot. And he just saw me standing on the side of the road, and he kind of just pulled over and rolled down his window, and we just made eye contact and sat there for a minute. He had tears in his eyes, and so did I. And I just kind of said, all I could say was like, who was the Madison officer? Yeah. And he told me Randy Tyler, and it's like I couldn't say anything. I just tightened my lips, and a tear ran down my face, and he did the same, and then he drove off, and that was pretty much how I felt like everybody was. It's like there's this anger and this indignance, but also what you don't know if you're outside of that community. And I'm not claiming to be entirely in it. Like, I'm very much in this weird place where the journalists think of me as somebody who is sympathetic to the cops, and so they don't always trust me, and the cops think of me as a journalist, so sometimes they don't trust me either. But it comes down to, like, just when you've been in that world, and they talk about how this hits them in the heart and soul every time. I do liken it in a way to soldiers overseas, because these are the people that you trust with your life. And if you got somebody who's there when you're shot, there is always going to be somebody who feels like they should have done something, that they could have, corrected it, that they could have been, it could have been them instead, that kind of thing. So you're not just dealing with the grief over the loss. You're dealing with the fact that this happened almost even in some form of a combat situation, or, we're a team, we're here to take each other's backs. And most of the time you can come to the place where you can say, there was nothing I could do, but there are still questions,
For anybody who thinks, why would a cop cry? Aren't they supposed to be so big and brave and strong? There are people like that. Don't forget, they are human beings.
Yeah.
They are human beings, just like you, just like me. They have a right, almost an obligation to their hearts to cry. And it's strength. It's not boo-hoo. It's tears of strength, loss of a colleague, even some who will come for services, and we don't know what the arrangements are or anything like that, but there will be law enforcement from all over the place coming to whatever services are there, and they will be in tears. And they should be.
Well, and I think I want to kind of draw the correlation, too, to the rest of their lives also. Because the thing is, people will talk about how cops are jerks or cops are cheaters or, cops don't show emotion or that kind of thing. And the fact is, when you have seen the things that cops do, it's hard to put those emotions out there, because if you let one out, they're all going to come at some point. And it's like, if you go online, you'll find statistics that say that most people suffer through, 3 to 4 traumatic events in their life. Police, it's 700 to 800, depending on how long their career is, obviously. And that goes for first responders across the board, But when we decide that officer that pulled us over was too gruff, you don't know what he did right before that. You don't know that he didn't just come from a fatal car crash where he saw a baby killed. You don't know that he didn't just have to, be at a scene. Those guys that were at that scene yesterday, a lot of them had to go on and continue their day after that.
And now, by the way, explain why. I saw somebody online complaining about, why did you have to have all those police there, all those agencies?
I saw those people too.
Yeah, explain how that happened.
So you have several things at work here. First of all, of course, you had to call in SWAT teams, and some of our SWAT teams are integrated. So you might have, like with DPS's SRT, it's going to be, I believe, Capitol Police, MHP, and MBN. You're going to have, Rankin County was there with Brandon PD because, when you bring in the Clinton bomb squad, that's because they needed the robots. So right there, you've got several agencies that are there anyway. But then you've also got, Madison PD is connected to a couple of different units with Rankin County and various things like that. And basically part of it was because Brandon was asking for help because their officers had been there since 1 a.m. So especially if you've got somebody who might be shooting out a window, you need to be alert. So they had to bring in backup. And there's only so many backups to have. But the other thing you run into is, the police chief and assistant chief at Brandon, they're former DPS. So, of course, anybody who's available after a cop is shot is going to that scene unless they're told otherwise in a lot of cases.
DPS, by the way, stands for Department of Public Safety. That's Highway Patrol.
Highway Patrol.
People don't know. Yeah. Sometimes people don't know the alphabet stuff.
Right. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. That's quite all right. Yeah, that's why there were all those there, and they want to be there for each other. Right. I had forgotten until last night that a long, long time ago, up in Michigan, I knew this woman just slightly, young woman, whose brother was on the Detroit police force, and he was murdered. Mm-hmm. And she went to the funeral, of course, being a family member, and she said, I've never seen anything like that. All these big guys from the Detroit Police Department standing around and in tears.
Yeah.
And, she didn't know. And that after a while, though, we learn because we see, unfortunately, so many examples of this. And by the way, if you're a crook out there and you think, oh, good, great time for me to go pull something off, right. They're going to be right there. Don't think that they're giving up their duty. No, they're not surrendering their duties at all. They'll be there. Don't think you can pull stuff.
And I think, Mary, that you and I can offer some advice to young journalists here too, because we're told. I remember having an argument with my first editor about the ethics of a situation. Like if you're standing on a bridge and you're doing a story and there's a guy who's about to jump, do you take pictures? Do you watch to see if he's going to jump? Or do you, if you are the one who can get to him and talk him down, do you do that? And I always said, no, you do that, because it doesn't matter that you're a journalist. You're a human first, and you have to live with yourself no matter what your job is after this. I want to encourage young journalists to understand that, yes, you're told to be objective. You're told to not let it touch you. You're told not to let it be something that, you invest in. Don't cry. This is not your story. This is your story, but this is not your story. In the end, if you don't have some feelings on a day like yesterday, I would advise that you find a different career, because if you can't find that kind of compassion for somebody who literally, when journalists show up, as you know, on a scene, like we're standing behind a line where the cops are standing between us and whatever bad thing could happen in many cases. And there's an adversarial relationship there now. But when I got started, it was like, we're all here. We're all in this thing together. Something evil just happened. And yeah, we report it. And now it's turned into, I'm going to see what evil thing I can say just happened.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. And in this case, I feel like I just want some of the younger reporters out there to know that it's okay to have feelings about this.
Absolutely.
And please go talk to somebody if you do. Because until we are more compassionate as an industry, that bridge between us and not only first responders, but also the community will never be bridged. Don't be afraid to have emotions.
Yeah, reporters are not bad people.
Right.
Most of them are very, very good, very sound, very smart people who know how to be objective on the air. I don't think very rarely did you ever see an example of Bert Case ever showing, except like the dog and the famous dog video where he's fighting off the pit bull, which is on YouTube, by the way. If you just Google Bert Case, B-E-R-T, not B-U-R-T, B-E-R-T, that's different. But all of his other stuff, and I think the big thing that everybody, what about the Fordyce story? Bert wasn't angry at Fordyce. I mean, it wasn't like, I'm going to get this guy. He was the sitting governor who took a woman who was not his wife, who stayed at the mansion, took another woman to Europe, and it was a story, and that's all there was to that. Bert bore no animosity. That was not a personal thing. But the next time Bert saw Fordyce, it was at some event or something, and Bert was sent to cover it, and the governor came out, and Bert said, "Governor, what about so and so?" And the governor said, "Oh, Bert, why don't you just go interview yourself?" I guess it was like, well, it was a news story, but you have to understand that, and reporters, I'm not reporting per se because I'm opinion now, but we're not monsters, and we want to be objective, and it's difficult sometimes, very difficult.
Well,
but you do it because you need to, but what you do is above and beyond anything I've ever done or most people have ever done.
Well, and I think that's why I wanted to deliver that message because, journalists, we think we've got this certain way of doing things and objectivity and all that. Well, cops do too. And what I have found living in the world that I live in, and sometimes the cops flinch when I say this and they don't like it, but some of the things we have to do to cope are very similar, and the ways we...
Well, how have you been since yesterday? How are you?
That's a good question. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do anything after that. Like, how do you go on after that?
You'll come and tell us on the other side of this commercial break. It'll be our final segment. Time's flying way too much. Order Dark Horse Press. And you got an update from our news department to pass.
Yes, just did. So we know that MHP and Madison PD and some of these folks out there in Gluckstadt were looking for a stolen car. And I'm looking at my different text just to give you, more complete information. Occupants from a stolen car that wrecked out. That car, as we just found out, actually matched the description of one that was supposed to be being driven by Joseph or Spring. What
last name?
Spring.
Joseph? Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah.
And of course, now I don't have that in front of me. But anyway, the escaped inmate from the Hinds County Detention Center. So if you're seeing that out there, I've gotten some text from you guys. That is what's going on out there. Is that they had a stolen car that wrecked out, and they were looking for the driver, and it sounds like the car matches the description of the escaped inmate, the last one he was seen driving.
Well, I just pulled up WLBT, and they've got a picture of an active search underway in Gluckstadt, possibly for this guy. Joseph Spring is his name.
Okay, that's
31. Dozens of Madison County Sheriff's deputies, along with other law enforcement agencies, are on Weisenberger Road. Police helicopter MHP circling Parkway East and a nearby wooded area. Officers armed. Roads near Parkway East are closed to traffic. And Hinds County Sheriff Tyree Jones is only saying, I cannot confirm at this time if it's the escapee or not. I can just say that there's an active search in the Gluckstadt area at this time, and there's a possibility it is the escapee. This has not been confirmed at this time. So we know the other guy, Michael Lewis, got caught nearby shortly after he got out of there on Monday. By the way, I would imagine Sheriff Tyree Jones is really spitting nails over this one.
Sure.
But we're talking about what happened in Brandon, and we've dedicated this day to law enforcement as well. We should, and that's Therese Apel with us. And we were talking about how you process. Where are you in processing? You're not finished processing. It's going to take you some time. And, where's your head?
So I'm blessed to have a good therapist. And this is kind of a personal thing, but then we'll take it back to law enforcement. But I was diagnosed with complex PTSD back in 2018. That is the kind of PTSD that soldiers and cops and, that kind of thing. It comes from a life of trauma. You also see it in like abused children and things like that, just getting used to being in fight or flight all the time. And so I still see, after 5 years, I still see my therapist once a week. For those of y'all that don't know how that works, sometimes you go to like once every 2 weeks, once a month, that kind of thing. But, so I'm lucky that he is someone who has worked with first responders and soldiers for his entire life. And he very much is able to go to these places with me in a way that I understand that he understands. And so otherwise, yesterday I left there and all I could think was that I wanted to go eat a brownie with ice cream. So I went up there, and Nicole, that used to work for me, still kind of does. I had texted her about it just to tell her I was going to do it, and she was like, hold up, I'll be there. And so she showed up just because she knew it had been that kind of day. And I think at a time like this, you just have to default to the things that you love very much. And you have to remind yourself why life is worth it. And sometimes, I do these ride-alongs with these police officers and stuff, and people always laugh about like, well, what if you get shot? Well, if I do, you know what? I want to go out having been thinking about the things that I love, not the trauma. I think to bring it back to law enforcement, I want to focus on this situation in Gluckstadt for a second, because when I was at the scene yesterday, a guy with the U.S. Marshals pulled up, and he's somebody that I just adore. And when I saw him, I said, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here. And he's like, why? And I said, because when you get here, everything gets better. I mean, like usually that's the case. When he's there, nice. Everything's under control. And he said, well, we've been out all night, looking for this inmate. And then I saw another marshal later on, or a guy on the task force, and he was exhausted. And so we had just found out that Officer Tyler had been killed. So of course everybody's standing around with tears in their eyes, but I just looked at him and I said, man, it's not getting easier, is it? And he just, shook his head and he said, and we hadn't stopped because we came from looking for that inmate. I want you guys to recognize that you've got people who may not have even slept more than just a little bit in the last 3 days because they've been looking for this inmate, trying to keep the world safe. They were out at that scene where one of their brothers was killed and another one was significantly injured. And then they turned around, they went right back to the search. And that's when I saw the marshals leaving. One of them said, we're going to go back to searching for the inmate now. Yeah. So I know that there are a lot of you that want to because you're super smart, or because, one time you got pulled over and got a ticket, or because, a cop stole your girlfriend or whatever. There's a lot of reasons that y'all think that you can vilify this whole group. But when I tell you that you will never understand the sacrifices these guys make, not just when they lose their lives, but when they sign up.
Their families do too.
Yes, and this is self-sacrifice. It is the greatest love. That's what the Bible tells us. Greater love has no man than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. And when you really want to look at that hard, it's not just dying for your friends. It is laying down your life. And when you look at these men and women who are out here on the front lines, every day could be the day you are standing at a standoff and somebody shoots you from across the street.
There's Perez.
I want to circle back all the way back around to the beginning.
Okay.
Why was this guy in the house with the gun initially?
Everything we've heard is it was a domestic situation. There may have been a breakup involved, and he, I don't know, had he gone there to try and talk her out of it, or what he thought he was going to accomplish. I believe they're doing toxicology at this point to see what, if there were other influences.
Mitigating things, yes.
Yeah, but I do know that it was a 22-year-old breakup.
Yeah.
Okay.
There were the two women, I guess the girlfriend and maybe the girlfriend's mother, and he went there in the middle of the night, obviously, to do whatever it was he was going to do. And somebody was able to call 911, apparently, and say that there was a domestic situation. It's always the worst for police, a domestic situation.
Those are the most dangerous by far.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, well, some people got in a fight. No. It's a lot worse than that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, now that is a statistic that people know better. But back in 2015, when I started doing a lot of my gang research, I wanted to prove that officers were often killed by gang members. You know, that like while we don't say this was a Vice Lord or this was a Simon City Royal, we do, you know, see these guys get murdered and whatever. So in my mind, I was going to prove this point. You know, that's what we do when we're journalists. We come up with a theory and we try to prove it. Well, what I did was disprove it. I mean, there are a lot that are, but what I found was overwhelmingly exactly what they say is true. Domestic violence, almost every time, it's an officer stepping in. Yeah. And again, on the 9th, we'll not celebrate, but we'll observe the anniversary of the death of Meridian Police Officer Kenneth Kroom,
go ahead,
who went in to save some children who were, you know, was subject to a situation where the another police officer unfortunately had killed their mother because they were breaking up. So
this is something that a listener has passed along online. He or she says it goes with law enforcement as well, and says I created this some years ago. It's hashtag SASTAS. See a soldier, thank a soldier.
Yes.
You know about that? That's pretty good. Hashtag SASTAS. See a soldier, thank a soldier. Well, you know, you could just do it with police. Obviously, do it with anybody.
Right.
With any law enforcers. So the families, you know, I was starting to say, too, the families are involved in this. It's, you know, in the work. You know, I wanted to be married to somebody who worked in television because it's an oddball job.
Right.
And if you're not there in some form of it, you know, the spouses aren't going to get it. You know, why does somebody call you in the middle of the night? You know, there's a big fire, there's a tornado, there's whatever. And, you know, a non-broadcast be like, well, why do you have to go? That's pretty lame.
Right.
But that has happened to so many people, and I did not want to live my life like that, and Bert did not want to live his life like that either. And so those are the unsaid things. You know, if we're going to argue, it's going to be about something like, you know, who's going to cook, not, you know, why you're going off in the middle of the night kind of stuff. And so these wives and husbands of all these folks are just as involved, and they have to be their support. They have to support them. You know, they have to take care of themselves, and you know that. But the provider has to take care of the provider, but the provider has to be there for that officer who comes home, and for this poor family whose officer did not.
Right. And I think that is something that, you know, I've got a friend that is single. She's in her early 30s, and she was talking about how, you know, she meets all these great police officers, but she's not going to marry a police officer or firefighter. And I was like, why? And she said, because you don't know that they're coming home every night. And I was like, you know, to me, I'm the type that I see that heart of giving. And I'm like, well, maybe he won't, but I love that he has that heart. I think that, you know, it's just hard to really gauge who these people are if you hadn't sat amongst them.
Yep.
You know, and that's the message that I always want to pass. And the reason that sometimes I do try so hard to bridge that gap, not just between the media and police, but also police in the community.
People are saying, you know, when you see a police officer, firefighter, you see a law enforcement officer today, but not just today, but every day, say thanks, even if, you know, even if you've done something that, whatever. If they've stopped you or whatever, say thanks. All right, everybody.
Absolutely.
The next thing that everybody will go through will be a memorial service for Randy Tyler, who kind of symbolizes everybody involved in all this. Thank you, Therese.